Depending on where you are in your financial situation, buying your first rental property, or any property for that matter, may seem light years away. I've got news for you. It may not be as far away as you think. There's a specific process behind purchasing your first rental property and using that property to create instant cash flow. That's why I'm so excited to have Antonio Cucciniello of Investarters on the show today to talk about that exact process. If getting into the real estate investing game is on your wish list, you don't want to miss this discussion. So Antonio and I met at FinCon back in 2021 in Austin. And since we're both residents of Austin, we've connected a few times in the past couple of years. Antonio has amassed a huge following across platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, where he shares valuable information about all things real estate investing. Antonio helps people feel confident in purchasing their first investment property and even has a mentorship program to help individuals purchase and create cash flow in as little as 3 months. Hi, Antonio. It's so good to see you. And thank you so much for coming on the show. I would love it if we could start with you maybe sharing a little about your background. Like, what was life like before you got into real estate investing?
I just want to thank you because that was like one of the best intros anyone's ever done for me. So that was good. Thanks. Um, so before real estate investing, I come from a immigrant Italian family. Both my parents were born in Italy, and they always told me I had to go to work to get a job, like being an engineer, lawyer, doctor. That's what was told. So I became a software engineer, and my first day at my first job, I was like, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. This sitting at the desk and being stuck at a certain amount of time, um, at being there from 9 to 5, whatever, wasn't what I wanted. But I didn't really necessarily know what I could do otherwise. So I spent a lot of time learning about a bunch of different topics. About how to make money outside of work. I literally texted my friend that day and I was like, man, this sucks. And he was like, dude, you have you ever heard of entrepreneurship? And I never did, even though my dad's an entrepreneur, my uncle's an entrepreneur, my other uncle's an entrepreneur. Like everyone in my family is an entrepreneur. They just hid it from me because they wanted me to have the safe route, which was having the job. And so at that point, I started learning about real estate investing, but I was 22, 23, and just graduated college, just started saving a little bit of money. And I'm like, how the heck am I going to afford a house? Not only that, but if I did, like, I need to make sure that if I put all this money into a house, I don't lose it all. That's really what I was scared of, especially as at that point in time, it's my entire life savings. I have nothing as a backup. And so I was actually renting a place during my first job, and I got the courage to email my landlord and say, "Hey, are you interested in selling the house?" And he was like, "I could sell it to you for this price, but honestly, it doesn't even work for me right now. Like, I'm losing money, so it's probably not best for you to go for it." And here I am thinking that, like, oh man, this experienced landlord messed it up. How how am I going to do this? So I just got really scared, and I kind of put it for pause. But I just kept reading books in the background and stuff like that. It took about 4 years of me just like reading books and feeling like, all right, I'm going to do this, and then being like, wait, I should probably read another book because I don't know all the information yet. Um, and that cycle of analysis paralysis just kept me stuck for a long time. And I finally, one day I had moved to New York City, gotten a new job, gotten a raise. I'm living in New York City, and my landlord sends me an email trying to raise my rent about 15%. And I immediately got pissed. I was like, I'm a good tenant. I pay my rent on time. I don't throw any parties. I don't complain about anything. The handyman has never even been to my apartment. And it just clicked in my head that at that moment I needed to be figure out a way to be on the owner side of things, not on the renter side of things. And so I pulled all my books out of the closet and I was like, I'm gonna figure this out. I don't care what it takes. And I tried to come up with a step-by-step process because that's what would have made me feel comfortable as a software engineer. All the books that I read, all the things that I did, seemed to come from a, yeah, just do this thing and do that thing. But this, like I said, I didn't want to lose all my money, so I had to feel confident about it. And so it took me a few months, but then I ended up getting my first property, and that was in 2019.
Wow. And did you get that property in New York or somewhere else?
It was in New Jersey. So I ended up having to, I was living in Lower East Side, so I biked to Penn Station. For those of you familiar with New York, about 25 minutes, and I took the train about an hour 15, and then I had to Uber, or sometimes my parents came with me to come look at properties because they live in Jersey. Um, and yeah, so that was my weekends from July 2019 to November 2019, just looking at houses every every weekend.
That's pretty exciting. And my boyfriend actually lived in Piscataway for a short amount of time, so I
Oh
feel
yeah.
like I've done that whole train situation. But do you
Yeah.
still have that property?
Yeah, it was my first property. Still have it. It's actually one of my best ones still to this day. I think I like to say because I was so scared that I made sure no matter what I was making money. Whereas some of the other ones now, not that I'm not making money from them, but like I was, I'm more comfortable with it, so I can make less money and feel confident that it'll still be in addition to the portfolio, less like it needed to be a home run. I was so worried about it being a home run that it ended up being a home run, but I lost 4 years. Had I been investing for those 4 years, I would have a lot larger of a portfolio at this point.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a firm believer in like divine timing, and I think everything happened the way it needed to. But I know how you feel. I know what you mean. Like sometimes it's like you got to take the risk, but I think it all worked out for you. So,
Yeah.
did you did you live in that property, and can you walk us through like your experience with actually purchasing it? I know you did a lot of research, but how was if you went through the mortgage process, like how was that for you? And again, did you live in that property at all?
Yeah, so the initial objective was to live in the property because it was just going to be me going into it. I had saved 30K to invest in it. It was a $195,000 triplex in the town that I went to college in, which is the town that I actually was living in before when I tried to buy that property, um, back when I first reached out to that landlord. And the mortgage process was actually pretty simple. I thought it was going to be this like very big complex thing, but really all it took was hopping on the phone with with a bank or a lender and telling them exactly what I wanted. Um, I wasn't trying to hide anything. I wasn't trying to, do some. I wasn't trying to cheat the system in any way. So I just told them how much I made, what my credit score was. Luckily, I had a financial situation ahead of time. A decent credit score in the 700s. I had saved up the 30K. I've had the job for 2 years. When I first tried to look, I didn't have the job for 2 years, so I knew that that was a requirement. I kind of had an idea of what I needed. And so a lot of that waiting phase was me like setting up my financial situation so I could get a loan for a house. So maybe for some people, if it's their first time going through, you might be surprised at all the requirements that are involved. And in all honesty, now being on the other side, there are so many creative ways to get around a lot of the initial requirements that had I known that, I would have been able to start a lot sooner. So I didn't, I don't want to set them as like, you need to have these things because I don't want people to feel like that they're limited by getting a traditional mortgage that most people would get.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I fully answered your question or not, but
You did, except for if you lived in that property. I know you said
oh,
that was the goal, but
yeah,
did you
I went
ever?
off a tangent. So 10 days before I was about to close on this property, my first option was with an FHA loan, which is one that you typically live in the property for. So I would have had to had one of the tenants move out within 60 days and move in myself. I was still working in New York City. It would have been a very far commute. Some people do it though. But I was so dead set on doing this that I was like, I'm going to do it, I guess. But I was telling my dad and my brother about what I was doing, and they were like, can we be a part of it? This whole time leading up to it, every idea I ever had, they were like, no, this is too risky. What are you doing? But then I showed them the numbers on paper, and all of a sudden they were like, can we get a part of this? So they both invested 15K each. And so we changed my what was going to be a 10% down FHA loan to a 25% down conventional investment property loan. So I didn't no longer had to meet the requirement to live there. So I could keep living in New York City, which was more fun at the time.
Wow. Okay. So your intention wasn't to have this property be a rental property, at least initially. Was it ever the goal for you, or did you just want to own a home?
No, it was 100% going to be a rental property, but I know I didn't have $60,000 myself to put in, so I just said, "Okay, I'll start this way." I because I knew it was better to start than it was to not start. One of the things that held me back in 2016, 2015 was this talk about like, oh, uh, Trump's going to get elected, the economy is going to crash, and so I was nervous on top of all the other nervous things. And then when he did, it didn't crash, and so then I watched prices go up throughout that time frame. And as I was sitting there looking on Zillow and seeing like, oh man, properties in Jersey City went up like 50,000 from where they were before. It like I just said to myself, okay, at this point, if anyone says something's going to crash, I don't care anymore because I've watched them say it's going to crash and then it didn't. And so I was like, I just need to buy a good property. And if it crashes, it crashes. I'll be okay as long as I can have consistent income on my own. Um, so that's why I kind of pushed forward, even though I knew it wasn't the perfect scenario. It's not ideal to have to commute over an hour every day to work, but uh, I was willing to do that to get to where I was. Luckily, I didn't have to, though.
Yeah, and I really like what you just said. Like you there was a point in time where what people thought was going to happen dictated how you moved. And you got to this place where you're like, you know what? I don't know the future. No one knows the future. People could be wrong. I'm going to move how I want to move anyways. And I think a lot of people listening to this, hopefully they take note of that because it's so easy to get caught up in, what people are talking about. But the reality is, if you are in a position to make a move that you've always wanted to make, don't not make that move because of what people are saying. So I appreciate that. That was inspiring.
Yeah, I think it's important to pay attention to what they're saying, but make sure to verify what they're saying is actually true and not just take what they're saying at a surface level. And also, you have to make a decision at the end of the day. Don't base it off of one of their decisions, unless if it is someone who is in the field that you like really admire and really think that they have access to greater information that you don't. Like, for example, in this case, would have been a real estate investor of like 30 years. If you were friends with someone like that and they were like, do not buy right now, I would probably take that advice. But like a parent or a friend or a family member that just says, the market's going to crash. I heard it on, whatever, CNBC, then like you probably shouldn't listen to them because they don't know really.
Yeah, good point. So that was about 5 years ago. That was 2019. What does your real estate investment portfolio look like now? And what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned along the way?
Yeah, so the portfolio now, I have 8 properties, co-owned with my family members, uh, and this has turned into like my parents' retirement fund. Uh, my like I said, both my parents came from Italy. They worked very hard to put me, my brother, and my sister through school, and so the objective with the portfolio is to first retire my dad because he's a contractor working on his hands and knees and has arthritis all over his body, and so he's in pain every day at work. And then uh, the other one afterwards is for my mom, and then after that, it'll be for me and my brother and my sister and our families. And the biggest lesson, one of the biggest things, I'll tell you one mistake and one positive thing. One mistake that I did was that I spread myself too thin, going towards too many different markets. Over the 8 properties are over 4 different cities in 4 different states, and at the time I thought it was a good idea because I would have access to more potential properties because if I look at 2 cities, I technically have double the supply of homes to look at, um, which means I could theoretically increase my chances of finding a good investment. But what ended up happening was is I had to communicate with now four different property managers. I had to communicate with four different contractors. I had to work with four different real estate agents, and I need to create foreign registrations for my LLC in every single state. And uh, so it gets complex now. I have to do taxes in all these states. It got way more complex, and I needed to understand the markets better. Um, I, I'm never going to be as good in all four markets as someone who lives in the market and someone who is only focused on that market. And so right now I'm thinking about cutting back and focusing on two markets. One that's more of a cash flow based market, meaning that I buy rentals and they'll bring me regular income, and one that is more of a break even in terms of cash flow, but has very high appreciation, meaning house values going up, because I think that those types of properties are really good for net worth building, whereas the other ones are really good for keeping your business alive and allowing you to have the income that you want. And so I'm looking at some form of a 70 to 30% portfolio allocation in an ideal world, but that's kind of where my head is going these days. Um, that was a mistake and a lesson in one. So I guess we'll leave it at that.
So for the four different states, I mean, is there a particular reason you chose those states? I'm assuming there is because it sounds like you like to do your research, but I'm curious what made you pick those four states and if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah. So New Jersey is the first one, and that was mostly picked because I knew the area and it was close enough by that I could go see it on the weekends. Then in 2021, before I moved to Texas, I needed to bring my car down from New Jersey to Texas. And I had always heard about all these other cities around the United States where prices were in the 50,000, 20,000. I could buy really cheap homes. And so I said it would be really cool if I did a content series where I go visit these markets. So as I drove my car down, I brought a friend with me, and we went to 9 different cities or 8 different cities over 9 days, and we stopped at a bunch of them. And I ended up having three different properties under contract in three different cities by the end of the road trip.
Wow.
And luckily, the one in Memphis went out of contract, but the other two I ended up getting, and I have one is in Little Rock. That was my only one in Little Rock, and then I have the other one was in Ohio, a suburb of Akron. Um, and then the fourth market came into play when uh, I ended up getting a deal that my dad owned some land that he bought in 2005 with a partner. The partner gave it to his daughter, his half share to the daughter. They were just paying property taxes for like 12 years, and she wanted out. So she sold her share to me and my brother for only 3,500 each, and
Whoa.
then we built on the property. Now it's worth 600. So it was a really good return on that one. But that was like a mistake. I did not, I didn't pick that market. It just so happened that that one market happened to be the number one appreciating market around the United States in 2021. The other two I ended up picking because the lower home values, higher rent prices, uh, relatively lower crime. By that I mean compared to some of the other cities that were on the list. They're not perfect. Just like every city, they have their own spots with crime. But I try to pick the better neighborhoods in those areas, and there were also landlord-friendly areas, which means that the laws are more favorable to the landlord than they are to the tenant. Like Arkansas is almost best in the nation in terms of during COVID, you were able to get tenants out for non-payment within 3 days, whereas
Whoa.
like in New Jersey, I couldn't even do anything until 2023.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
or 2022, sorry.
So did you do your research before the road trip or like did you know where you were gonna stop when you went?
Yeah, so the research process is pretty simple and complex at the same time. I basically think of a bunch of cities, um, and I use at this point now I'll use ChatGPT. At that point, ChatGPT didn't exist, but I would use blog posts and just looking on places like Bigger Pockets to see where other people were talking about they were investing. But I didn't want to just take what other people say. And I learned this lesson back when I was in New York going to real estate meetups, trying to learn about what was good about investing. I could talk to one person over here, and they would tell me that investing in Detroit has been the best decision they've ever done. They're killing it on all their properties. And then I could talk to one person over here who's saying that investing in Detroit was the worst thing they've ever done. Their house has gotten shot up 4 times, right? That's not what you can't make a decision off of what other people say. You can only take what they say, like I said, with a grain of salt, and then use data to back up your decision. So I would throw a bunch of cities on the list that I knew were on the route on how to get to Texas from, and I knew I was going to go the northern route down. So like New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio area. And then uh, I picked all the cities that I thought would be potential options. I put them on sheet and I looked up the crime rates, the unemployment rates, the population growth, home prices, rent prices, property tax rates, and landlord friendliness. And then I rank each city based off of how they perform compared to the other ones in each category. I provide a score for those, and then I add up those scores to give them an overall score, and then I theoretically pick the best ones based on their score. Um, that's my engineering brain trying to turn it into a process.
Totally.
It's a little bit more. Everything is an art and a science, but I tried to make it more of a science. And so then I picked cities that made sense to stop at, because if there was one that was like 4 hours away, it didn't really make sense, right? I had to pick it on the road trip. So that was kind of the process.
That is incredibly helpful, and I love that formula or those criteria that you mentioned. I think that would be really helpful for someone who's listening. So, how would you advise someone to prepare for home buying, especially if they don't have good credit or much cash flow? Are these things required? Can people in those situations get around having, not so great credit and limited cash flow when purchasing a home?
Yeah, so it's possible. It just becomes harder. The better your financial situation is, the easier and the more options you will have. I'm not going to deny that. It's 100% the case. But if you're someone who has bad credit, one thing you could do is partner with someone who has credit. If you partner with someone who has credit, they can look at the other person's credit score and help you qualify for that house. Same thing if you don't have the funds for the house, you could partner with someone who might have the funds, but you have the time and the experience. You have to trade something for your lack of something else. I look in real estate, there's 5 resources we would call knowledge. You can technically combine these two, but knowledge and experience. Most of the beginners won't have experience. So we'll just cross that one off. Time to actually spend investing, money, like actual cash in your bank, and then your ability to get financing, which might mean your credit score, your job history, your experience as a real estate investor. So these 5 things, if you're someone who has money, you can typically trade that for someone who has time and knowledge, like what I do. If someone wants to come invest with me, they can provide money and I can use my knowledge and my time to find the deal and partner with them. That's an option. But if you don't have the money, then you need to use the time that you have every single day to either A, earn the money, or work on your credit so it gets fixed, or B, I guess C is, I lost my train of thought. Make the money, get the credit, or C, invest in knowledge by reading books, whatever, and trying to figure out this thing. This way you can partner with someone who doesn't have the time but has the money. That's like very high level, but I'll try to give a couple of practical tips. So the credit one again is you could partner with someone who has credit. The other thing you could do is there's a lot of these credit boosting programs. I've never tried them, but um, there was this thing that I was a part of where there was an agency that I would work with that would add people to my credit card as an authorized user, and they would basically be able to borrow my credit score history to get qualified for a car or get qualified to rent a place. That might be an option for you, or you might need to spend 5, 6 months trying to actually improve your credit. And then the last option would be trying to get a seller financing deal, which I have not done, but seller financing is when the owner of the house gives you a mortgage rather than you getting a mortgage with a bank. The seller of the house
Mm.
could try to work with you without getting the credit, um, and you providing other things, but you might need to pay a higher interest rate. You might need to pay more money down, but they're flexible. That's for the credit scenario. For those who don't have money, moving into the house yourself is probably a good option because they offer a lot of programs like FHA. You only have to put 3.5% down. USDA, if you live in a more rural area, you can use that with 0% down. You can also get the seller to pay your closing costs as part of what you negotiate. And there's also down payment assistance programs, which will cover up to 5% of your down payment and closing costs. In some cases, they're grants, which means you don't have to pay them back. Other cases, they're loans, and some of those loans could also be forgivable if you meet certain requirements. Um, and then also a partnership could help you overcome the lack of money, like I did in my scenario. I didn't have the 25%. I had 12.5%, I guess you could say, and they had the other 12.5%. Um, so there's always a way around it. It's just a matter of it's going to make it harder for you, and it depends on how much more do you want it to actually do it. You have to do more work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's incredibly helpful. And I think it really just depends on the person and what they're willing to do. What if someone maybe, has good credit and has money for a down payment? What will the loan application process, or what could it look like? And let's say they don't qualify for FHA. I know you mentioned a few other loans, but are there other options for someone who um, maybe just is ready to buy, and or they're getting their second property, something like that?
Yeah. There's another loan that is what most people get. It's called a conventional loan, and it's just backed by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which are government sponsored entities, which basically mean that you go to any bank to buy a property, to get a mortgage, and at the end of the day they end up selling that loan back to these entities instead of keeping the loan themselves. So you might get a loan with Bank of America, but then Bank of America will replenish their funds by getting it back from the government sponsored companies. And so if you have the down payment, you have the credit score, the mortgage process is not complex, but it will feel very urgent as you're going through it. They'll call you and be like, "We need these documents right now, otherwise you're not closing on the house." And it'll feel like you have to stop everything you're doing. And um, I can tell you from experience that you probably should do what they're saying quick if you want to close on time. So just try to act relatively quickly, but don't throw off your entire day for it unless if it's extremely time sensitive. But for the most part, you're going to have to, if you're applying with a conventional loan, you're going to have to prove your income by using W-2s or by using tax statements. So this way people can actually see how much money you're making. So there's some form of verification of income. You'll also have to write in all of your debts of like what you're actually spending money on. Do you have student loan debt, credit card debt, that kind of thing, car payments? Because they need to verify all the things that you said on that initial phone call when you got a pre approval letter that says, "Hey, I could buy this house." So maybe I just take a step back and say the first thing you do is just call them and you tell them the high level, and they'll give you a piece of paper that says, they'll run your credit real quick and say, "Hey, this person's good enough. We think up to 500,000 or up to 300,000." And you take that and then you go try to find a house. Once you actually get the offer accepted, then you call up that same bank and you say, "Hey, I got the offer accepted. We need to start going through the process." And so then you'll start uploading all these documents, your driver's license, all these things, and then they will verify them. They'll also do something known as an appraisal, where they'll send someone out to the house to make sure that you're actually buying the property for the value that the property that you're buying is worth what they're giving it to you, what they're giving you the loan for. So you need to make sure that remember this, that the bank cares about getting their money back. Everything they do in the process is about protecting them getting their money back. And so if for some reason that you're buying the house for more than what the bank says it's worth, they're not going to loan you the full amount anymore. They're going to loan you less than that, and you'll have to come to the different table when you close with the difference between what they're offering, what they're going to give you, and what you're offered on. Um, Once the appraisal is done and that's done, then there's a process called underwriting, which usually takes a really long time, but in my opinion, shouldn't, which basically just proves that, yes, everything is okay. This person should go through. And honestly, I'd love to work in one of those departments just to see how slow they're being on everything. But once you get past through the underwriting, then there's usually a clear to close. If you've gotten all the other things that you need along the way, like insurance, you've done your inspections, that kind of thing. And then once you close, you typically show up with a check or you wire the money if you're doing it remotely. You sign your life away to the mortgage, and then it's yours.
Have you ever experienced someone who got a pre-approval notice but did not get approved for a mortgage?
I have not run into that scenario. Um, yeah, I've not run into that scenario. I've had a ridiculous time trying to get pre approved conventionally. After I left my full time job, I was trying to buy a house in Austin and I got it was ridiculous. It took me 3 months to get a pre-approval letter. Um,
Whoa, why?
because at that point I had multiple properties and they were under LLCs, and so I needed to prove mortgage, property taxes, insurance for each property. I had my Roth IRA. I had like 18 bank accounts, some for my business, some for my personal, some for the real estate. And then it was a very complex financial situation, and I wasn't showing a lot on my personal income because it was a business. I was trying to write it all off. And so then I had to bring my brother in to co-sign with me. And so then he needed all his documents. Um, and so it was a nightmare just to get the pre-approval letter. I, I wouldn't be surprised if there are scenarios like that, because there are some lenders who will give you the pre-approval letter and not do that much due diligence in making sure that you are telling the truth on what you're saying.
Mm.
And they're very quick, but it's not a scenario that I've had to run into or anyone that I've worked with has run into.
Interesting. So if it is a thorough pre-approval process, everything after that should be relatively smooth. If it's a quick pre-approval process and the underwriters find something, down the line, it could slow things up.
Yeah, actually, there is one scenario. My friend tried to buy a house the day after he bought another house and didn't tell the second bank that he was buying a house the first day. And so they found out, and he had to delay the closing because he had to prove that he could actually still qualify for it. Underwriting flipped out and they said to him, like, I can't believe you're doing this, whatever. It still worked out at the end of the day. It just took a whole week of waiting, basically, and them rerunning the numbers.
Wow. So, well, I mean, money talks, right? I mean, if at the end of the day you can afford it, then you can afford it.
Yeah. Don't buy anything, or don't buy any large things that would increase your that would make your credit limit be overused, or take a credit hit during that time frame, because they'll freak out. Or don't quit your job during that time frame. Quit the day after you buy the house. It's okay at that point. They don't care. But until that day where you sign the dotted line and you've gotten everything, you're clear to close, everything's good, then don't do any of these things that might cause complications, because it'll just make your process a little bit more difficult.
A question for you. So let's say someone makes really good money, like they show it, they prove it, but they have a lot of debt. At what point will they potentially be denied for a loan because of their debt? Is there the debt to income ratio? Is there a limit, so to speak?
Yeah, it's different based on how much money. So the debt to income ratio will depend on what kind of loan you use. Um, I'm not a lender, but I've tried to work with lenders to get a really good idea of what that number is. And for FHA loans, I've heard that you can go as high as 55% debt to income, but that's including what the house payment will be plus all the other things. But I think that most banks want like a 36% pre-tax income, which is nice. It's pre-tax, it's not post-tax. So it really means a lot more than what you're taking home. So at the end of the day, uh, yeah, it's important that you try to keep your debts low. So if you're about to go apply for a house, it would make sense that you pay off a large sum of debt that you might have, which, in funny enough, might hurt your credit a little bit, but will also, I believe, at least that from my understanding of how the scores work, but then also it will help because your debt to income will be lower, which means you can qualify for more house.
That's super helpful. So, obviously, the upside to real estate investing is the income earning potential. I mean, I feel like the options are endless when it comes to how much you can earn, but can you shed some light on maybe some of the downsides? I feel like everybody focuses on the positive, which is great, but I want people who maybe don't know or don't have experience to understand maybe the other side of the spectrum.
Yeah, well, even if you do post about the downsides, no one watches it because it's not exciting and it doesn't get shown to more people. That's part of the problem. It's the algorithms don't want it. Um, so downsides, like I said, when you're closing on a house, it feels like it's the most important thing in your life and you can't do anything else. Everything you do involves, if the lender calls you, if your real estate agent calls you or a wholesaler or whatever, you have to pick up no matter what you're doing. That's what it feels like. Another thing is that there are weeks where I have property managers on my properties, but there are weeks where it feels like no matter what, I'm doing things for the properties and I'm not doing anything else. But
Mm.
those weeks are in minor comparison compared to the weeks where I do little to nothing at all. And so I try to remind myself of those weeks more than other weeks. And then there's some times where uh, I feel this right now is that if you look at my bank account, I am really broke. But but I'm like, oh, like my net worth is growing every single day and the properties are making money, but like because I keep taking whatever money I have and trying to put it back into another property, the bank account shows very little. And so like on paper, I feel like I am uh, in real life, I feel like I'm really broke, but like, I'm not saying I'm rich, but I'm not broke either. So it's just like yeah, like I need I need some money right now to keep my social media business afloat so I can refinance one of my properties that has $220,000 worth of equity that I didn't touch. Um so I can take 50K just like that and not have to really worry about it, which is nice. But you know, I had no cash in my bank account, so I needed that money, right? It's not money that
Yeah.
you wanted. So long story short is that, uh, and my friends send each other these memes all these times about like how you feel broke, but like you're really not. But it happens. I don't know. I think it's different than a little bit different than the stocks because with stocks, like you can just like log in and see how much it is. Whereas with real estate, you don't actually just log in and see how much it is. You only log into the bank account and you like if the bank account shows no money, you feel like you have nothing, but there's really all the equity in the houses and you built up a consistent income that keeps coming in regardless of those things that are paying for all these expenses that you just don't really see. So it's important to like take a step back and look at how far you've come and the equity you've built up and all the ways real estate actually makes money that isn't showing on paper.
That's a very good perspective. And it makes me wonder if someone is purchasing their first real estate investment property, is there like a certain amount of money you would recommend they have put to the side for emergencies? Like, I feel like everyone's situation is going to be different, but if something were to happen that was very costly and they didn't have the money to fix it, I mean, I would think that would be a problem. So, do you have any recommendations on how much someone should save?
Well, so it depends on what, like you're saying, like let's say you buy a property and you put all your money in for the down payment and you're left with nothing afterwards, that
Hmm.
scenario.
Yeah.
So in those scenarios, you luckily get to see the property and before you do anything. So the way I look at it is don't walk into a scenario if you're putting all of your money into the down payment in a house that clearly needs work or is going to need work very soon, don't do it. It
Mm.
doesn't make sense unless if you can find a way to borrow the money from someone else and pay them back, and you know that whatever you put in will get you more, and so you could pay them back. Uh, and so this is why I'm a big proponent for people who are starting out to buy what's known as like turnkey properties or close to turnkey, meaning like they're already rented out and or they are ready to be rented out and there's not much work that needs to be done. It's a lower barrier to entry, and sure, there's going to be more competition for those deals than the deals that have work, but as a beginner, your objective is to see the process through and get a base hit. Get on base and be like, okay, this works. I'm collecting money. I'm paying my mortgage. I'm doing all these things. And in 5 years from now, the property might be worth another 10% higher or something, whatever. And so you see that, and then you take that money and you start, now that you're on base, it's easier for you to get to second. And so when you can get to second by saving more money and doing that. So my thing is about getting a base hit. And a lot of times you want to pick a property that doesn't need as much work. But if you're going to get into that scenario where you're going to buy a house and you don't necessarily have the capital, you can try to use a hard money loan instead, which is risky in itself because you're taking on a short term, high interest rate loan. But if you do the math right, every it's just another cost of doing business. It's hard to explain without going into all the details of what a hard money loan is, and I don't want to necessarily overwhelm everyone with all that, but trying to give as many options as possible.
No, I think that's really helpful. I think you make such a good point. Like, don't go into a situation risking or putting all of your money into it, and you know that you could need money to fix it up. I mean, I think that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, or if you like, you need money for a ring or a house that you're going to buy with a significant other or a car or something, like factor that into what your down payment is going to be. I would argue that you should buy the rental property before you buy the ring or buy any of those other things, but that's my opinion.
So you mentioned property managers. So do you use property managers? And was there ever a point in time where you managed the properties yourself?
There was never a point in time when I managed the properties myself. And some days I think, okay, maybe I should be doing that, but in other days I think it doesn't make sense for me to do that because I don't want to spend more time in the business. I'd rather spend more time on the business. Um, my first property, there were no real property management companies in the area that I could find that had like good ratings. So I was ready to do it, but then I told my real estate agent, and he was like, "I'll manage it for you." And he had no experience, so excuse me, he charged me a like very low percentage, like 6%. Most property managers charge about 8 to 12%
Oh,
of the monthly rent. So I took him up on it, and because I didn't want to have to deal with something while I was in New York City and come down.
yeah.
And now I definitely don't want to have to get on a plane to go to any of the other ones. So, uh,
You don't want to
but
go to Arkansas?
no, no, I mean, I don't mind going. I actually probably should go, but I, I don't want to do that multiple times a month. That's for sure. That's expensive and very time consuming.
So my brother and I, we share two rental properties. They're long-term rentals, and we manage them ourselves. And it's when there's no news, like everything is perfect, it's smooth sailing, money's coming in, and then, when people move out or, things go wrong, it's all hands on deck. So I don't know what's better.
I know that's the problem is I hate the all hands on deck feeling as much as possible. That's my least favorite part of the whole real estate buying process. And I don't want to do that on a daily basis or, the more properties you have, the more those problems scale up or the more chances that you end up running into a scenario where five people want the same thing in the same day. I have 18 tenants. So across the 18 tenants, if three of them want the same thing, that's a lot of problems to deal with in the same day on top of trying to build a business or trying to buy rental properties or working your 9 to 5 or dealing with kids. And so it adds up over time.
Yeah. Do you do short-term or long-term rentals, and do you have a preference on either or?
I do mostly all my properties right now are long term. I've had a few. I had one property that I was planning on doing a short term under contract, but I couldn't get government approval for it. It was in a historic area. And I'm actively looking to try to do one in Italy. I think personally that short term is great in up markets, but by that I mean in great economic times. But right now, I'm very conservative. I don't want to lose money, so for me, I think that long term rentals are going to be more stable and safer over the long term. And if something works as a long term rental, I could always try to turn it to a short term rental down the line. But a lot of times, like what happened in Austin, is a lot of people bought short term rentals. And then now that short term rentals aren't as booming because we're kind of in a recession, whatever you want to call it, uh, they aren't making as much money, and now they're having to backup plan as a long-term rental or a medium-term rental, and they're not making as much. And they're actually under their mortgage and they're keeping their mortgage alive, which isn't the worst scenario to be in, to pay only $200 or $500 a month towards your mortgage, but it's not really that good of an investment anymore unless if the appreciation is insane. So
Yeah. Okay, that's a good perspective. So long-term rentals probably where people would want to start.
yeah, I think if you're going to do short term rental, you probably want another backup plan. Like I could either flip it or because it's a little bit more risky,
Yeah.
just inherently.
Okay.
The first thing people let go of when they don't make as much money is things they don't need, which is a vacation.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a good point. So can you talk about your experience with real estate investing and taxes, and more so after getting your first or multiple properties? How did that change your tax situation? I know you mentioned you had an LLC, but let's say someone maybe doesn't have an LLC and they have this rental property. Are there certain things they should keep in mind from a tax perspective?
I've used an accountant throughout the entire process because the first time I tried to do it, as you can tell, I'm very much if I can't do it, I'm just going to have someone else do it for me, type of person who knows how to actually do it instead of me wasting all my time trying to figure it out. The first time I tried to do my taxes, I had, I think I had written that I owed the government like $7,000. And I was like, how the hell is this possible? And then I had an accountant do it. I paid them $500 and they somehow did it where I got $3,000 in return. And so at that point, I said, that was a 20x return on my money. I should just do this. So also my brother's a CPA, so he works at a real estate company now, so he's actually learning a lot about this to try to help our business. But in terms of doing it on your own, I mean, the standard deductions of deducting your mortgage interest and deducting, I think you can deduct property taxes, any management expenses, repairs expenses. So you're just going to have to keep detailed bookkeeping of what you're doing. And up until last year, I would spend in March literally writing down every transaction on a spreadsheet myself. But I finally decided to get QuickBooks and pay for a bookkeeper. So that is helping a lot. I would highly recommend that if you don't want to lose a week of your life trying to write stuff in a spreadsheet and drinking a lot of coffee trying to do it all.
That's good advice. Like just start, from the beginning, just have your systems and the proper people in place.
I think it makes sense to learn about the laws and stuff. Like I love learning about it, but I just so I could talk to my accountant when I do and say, "Hey, can we do this thing?" Like for example, I'm thinking about selling one of my properties right now, and I'm one of my real estate investor friends was like, "You should talk to him about avoiding the taxes you would take on that, and not through a 1031, is through this other thing by offsetting some of the other rental income, whatever." And so I didn't know that that was a strategy. I didn't even know of that option. But you need to learn about them so you can know of what you can do. You need to know what's in your toolbox, but you need to verify with the accountant to be like, hey, can I do this thing? Um, because you don't want to get audited.
Right. Yeah. We don't want more problems.
Hmm.
So I want to shift gears just a little bit. I know I had mentioned earlier that you have quite a large following on social media, over 650,000 followers on TikTok and over 285,000 followers on Instagram. How has that helped your business? And do you use those platforms to help your real estate investment business?
How has it helped? I would argue that it's helped and it's hurt. It's hurt in the sense of I've I quit my full-time job where I was making good money in New York to try to focus on building this social media business. And I still do not make as much money through my social media business as I did as a software engineer. And so it hurt in that sense because building a business is a lot harder than coding a couple hours a day and making it seem like I do a full-time job. So I spent a lot of time and focus. I think if I didn't have the job and I was just stacking cash away and spending all my time outside of work buying properties or even in work buying properties, my portfolio would be larger in that sense. Uh, how it has helped, it has opened up a lot of doors for networking. A lot of CEOs of companies all of a sudden care about me. They would not normally care about me if I had 8 properties like I do. That's not a very large portfolio compared to some other people, but they all of a sudden care about me and want me on their podcast, or they want me to make content for their page because I have eyeballs. And so it has been a great networking piece, which is huge for real estate. And real estate is still very much a person to person place. And so I also have like lenders who DM me. And now I started a new company with my friends Matt and Kevin, where we are raising money through social media and having everyone to have the ability to invest with us in properties. And so
Wow.
it allowed this new avenue. We're doing our first 2 flips right now. Our first one is on the market to be sold. And so we're trying to get the audience involved in our investing, which allows me to make more profit, allows them to make more profit, and get them started investing sooner. So it has its advantages, but it's also had its cons. And I'm not, going to sit here and pretend like that's not true.
I mean, I feel like with that type of following, you probably have helped so many people, but I'm also sure you've probably gotten some not so nice things. How do you manage that, or do you just like let it
I
roll?
cry
You cry.
a lot. Yeah. I, no, there's points where I get very frustrated. I'm not going to lie, because uh, I could have so many good intentions going into a video, and somehow, in some way, no matter what I do, they will find a way to try to bring me down or bring the video down, whatever I try to do. And in fact, the ones that are the most viral, that reach the most people, are typically the ones that have the most people who say I'm a leech or an evil person or a greedy person, which couldn't be farther from the case, in my opinion. I'm biased though. And so uh, I wish I had something very practical, other than I stopped reading the comments as much.
Yeah, I feel
There
you
are
have
points
to.
where I was like, oh yeah, like I had the problem of I would read 100 good comments and there'd be one person, to be nice, who says something really mean, and that would basically invalidate the 100 nice comments that I get.
Yeah.
And so I looking at the comments less has helped my ability to not hate the comment section. And also watching other people in niches that would have never experienced, I would have never even thought in my wildest dreams that they would have haters, but they do. And so I kind of just realized it happens no matter what. And it's not just because they think I'm a greedy person. It's no matter
Right.
what you're going to do, they're going to hate you regardless. There are going to be some people that hate you and some people that don't. So accepting that as well has helped.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I feel like it's happened to me on a very small scale, and I don't like the thought of it happening on a bigger scale, but it is what it is.
It only gets worse. I'll tell you that much. I wish I had better answers for you.
So we kind of talked about this a little bit, but basically investing in your first investment property can be a big leap of faith. And sometimes people stay in their comfort zone a little too long, just fear of the unknown. Do you have any words of encouragement for someone who is questioning if they should take the leap or not?
Yeah, there's people that are dumber than you. There's people that have had less money than you, people that have come from worse experiences than you, people that have worse credit than you, worse whatever. Every scenario has been done before. Real estate is not a complex game. It is just a game that takes time and effort to learn, just like anything else. But it's not like you don't need to be this super smart person or do anything crazy for it. Um, and so you're probably overthinking it so much so that you're keeping yourself back.
Mm.
And that's really what it comes down to is the overthinking is really what's hurting you because you're just not confident because you haven't seen it go through. And the only way to really make that work is to see it go through, unfortunately. And so you're stuck.
Oof. Wow, that's good advice. So just take the leap. It'll all work out the way it needs to.
No, I'm not saying just take the leap and buy whatever. I'm saying do the math, look at the properties, make your decisions based on data, as much as logic as possible, and see if you can get them verified by an investor friend you know, by going to a meetup or whatever, or a real estate agent who might have an investment property here or there. Do as much as you can, but there's a point where you need to just say, okay, I'm going to try. And 4 years is too long, like I did. So do something shorter than that.
Well, I think this leads us nicely into your mentorship program. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you help people?
Yeah, it's actually changing a bit. So it's not going to be exactly the same as it used to be. Before it was just primarily just mentorship, but we had I've done a lot of different versions like one-on-one, group, um, and typically it involves you hopping on a call and me teaching something for a bit and then helping people analyze deals, picking markets. Uh, a lot of it is having them understand that they're being blocked within themselves, and that's really what it comes down to. Not that they don't know the information. Most people who come on know the information, but they've just stopped themselves in one way or another. Um, what we're looking to do, which is not officially announced yet, so um, we're just going to leave it at this. We're looking to combine an educational program with our company, House Hack Helpers, that people can invest with us. And so we're looking to try to make an offering where people can invest with us and basically, quote unquote, get paid to learn on a successful flip. If we do well, you get paid out, but also you get to learn as we're going through the process. And so I'm less interested in the coaching dollars as I am in making money from real estate. And so this allows me to combine both while teaching other people how to do it along the way. Um, I wish I had more concrete information than that, but that's really it.
Okay, well, when that becomes available, please let me know so I can share with my community because that sounds like a really good opportunity to learn and be hands-on and potentially get something back for your money that you're putting in.
Yeah, most the way I look at it is when I started out, I didn't have anyone to help. So part of the reason why I made content was because I felt like there was a very big need for people in my exact scenario to talk about it, and it seems like it resonated with people. So uh, one of the issues I had was I didn't know anyone. I didn't have a real estate investing mentor in my life that I could just reach out to. And so, or the ones that wanted it wanted 10, 15, 20, 30 grand, which was all my money for my down payment. And so I'm trying to keep the education as free as possible. Um, but it needs to be subsidized in some other way. And so the way I'm trying to do that right now is by you pay us to invest, you get a return on your capital when we're successful, and you learned along the way. Whereas instead, the other option is you pay $10,000 for a mentorship, and then you have to do all the work to buy a property, and you're still doing it yourself rather than we're doing it and you get a return. The only difference is we split the profits.
Yeah, but I mean, I feel like you can learn so much by watching someone else do it, and then you can take that information and apply it to your own situation.
Yeah, exactly. Like we're recording our partners Matt and Kevin because they live by the properties. They're going through checking up on the contractor. You're getting to see stuff that even in a normal mentorship you would not typically see because it's more just like a PowerPoint or someone teaching something that way. This is a little bit more hands on. He goes through the property and you get to see actually that we thought we were going to be able to the property live, but the contractor didn't do a lot of finishing touches. And so he's on the phone with the contractor yelling at him, whereas that does not, you don't normally get to see that. And so showing more of those behind the scenes, like the real stuff of what actually happens is kind of the route we're going down. And so we're hoping that people want it and we could buy a lot of properties that way.
Awesome. Very cool. Very cool. I will keep an eye out for that and we'll share when it is available.
Thank
Um,
you.
so where can listeners connect with you? Where would you want me to send people to follow up with you?
Best place is probably Instagram. I'm pretty active on there to responding to messages and stuff. If you send me a message and you get an automation, I'm sorry, but I can't respond to every single thing. I try my best. So just message me again, and at some point I'll eventually get back to you. But my handle is Investarters, Investarters.
Perfect. I will link to that in the show notes. Antonio, thank you so much for everything you shared. I feel like it was incredibly valuable. I learned something. I know the people listening have learned something. So I appreciate you so much. Thank you.
I'm glad. I'm glad I was able to help.